Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to BookTrek 2025. This is a summer-long BookTube event created by Vin at Revenant Reads, where we read Star Trek fiction and nonfiction all summer long. You can read Star Trek novels, any of the hundreds and hundreds, or maybe thousands that are out there, or you can read some, if you want to do an away mission, you can read some Star Trek-connected nonfiction, like some of the memoirs written by ghostwriters for the cast, or show logs like Star Trek Lives or stuff like that. And I've been reading a lot of Star Trek, but I haven't been making a lot of BookTrek videos. I mean to rectify that. So I threw a Star Trek related book on the pile last night. Nonfiction. That on the surface looked promising. It's this. It's edited by Peter Lee, and it is called Exploring Picard's Galaxy. Essays on Star Trek The Next Generation. Which sounds promising. How does Picard's galaxy differ from Kirk's galaxy? What has been the impact of the knowledge of the Borg? What was the impact of the war with the Borg and Wolf 359? What, and so on and so forth. What about synthetics? What about data? There are a whole bunch. There are innumerable essays that I could think of you could get people to write about Star Trek The Next Generation. And this wasn't that. This was horrible. Absolutely horrible. It was about intersectionality and gender representation and gender fluidity in Picard's universe. And it was insanely 2018 Twitter. All of it was. Almost all of it was. There were a couple of stray lines or paragraphs in stray essays. No whole essays. But a couple of stray lines or paragraphs in stray essays that were interesting without posturing about blue-haired scolding and finger-wagging. But all the rest of it was just... All the rest of it was... I'm sure the writers would disagree with this, and probably Peter Lee would disagree with this, but all the rest of it was the writers saying, I don't care at all about Picard's galaxy. All I want is a chance to map my identity politics weirdo delusions onto this property. I don't know the property very well. Oh my God, I lost track of how many times in these stupid posturing essays the writer was not only seeing intersectionality where it doesn't exist, but also simply being wrong about The Next Generation, and I'm hardly an expert. That's what this was, just over and over again. Writers saying, I don't really care about this Raygun bug-eyed monster stuff. I just want another chance to lecture people. I haven't had enough chances to lecture people, so I want another chance to do it. By showing you, because, I get up in the morning, I just have to educate everyone all day long. It's exhausting. There's no one who can do it but me. Gandhi's dead, so there's no one who can do it but me. So I have to educate people that when they're watching Star Trek The Next Generation, they're actually watching queer cinema. I have to educate people that that is what they're seeing, and didn't you notice? But it's so exhausting. I kept hoping that each essay would turn this thing around, but none of them did. So we're not going to talk about that. Instead, we're going to talk about this. The Price of the Phoenix by Sandra Marshak and Myrna Kullberg. A Star Trek novel from the 1960s. It was one of the earliest Star Trek novels. It was born in the hotbed soup of the fan fiction that was largely the only Star Trek fiction we were getting at the time. And I've talked about it a million times on this channel. But better to talk about it 1,001 times than to talk about Picard's intersectionality. God help us. So, yay. This is this is the story of a renegade scientist named Omni, O-M-N-E. And he has created a backwater refugee renegade planet, but he is a genius on many fronts of science and has developed impenetrable electronic shielding. He shields his entire world with that shielding. So that he can make a little hole-in-the-wall world without the Federation or the Romulans or the Klingons being able to do anything about it. And he has there created an enclave of multiculturalism, of many of the indigenous cultures of the Federation, where they get to live the way they want without the what he views as the superimposed homogeneous benevolence of wall-to-wall empires like the Federation. The Federation is the empire he dislikes the most for being blandly, uniformly moral and kind. And he invites to this hole-in-the-wall planet the foremost representative of of the Federation's benevolent kindness, the Enterprise under Captain Kirk. Kirk and Spock beam down to the planet. There they meet the female Romulan commander from the Enterprise incident, so we know roughly at least when this story takes place. First 5-year mission after the 3rd year. They meet that female Romulan commander who was a huge fan favorite. She crops up in so much of the Star Trek fiction that has never been reprinted from those old dot matrix days and never will be reprinted. The Star Trek fan fiction from the zines, she was all over that. Because it's such a wonderful, until the end of the episode, it's such a wonderful character. She's totally competent. She sees right through Kirk and Spock as soon as she gets as much information as the viewer does. And let's keep in mind that, now they're not in the same military service, but she does outrank Kirk. That was a Star Trek, a science fiction TV show in the 1960s in which a woman is commanding not just a warship, but 3 warships. A warship group. And you totally believe it in that episode. So she's a major character in this book, and she is already there, talking with and maybe negotiating with Omni on behalf of the Romulan Empire. Her ships are in orbit, but they aren't able to penetrate those shields any more than the Enterprise is. And while Kirk and Spock are there, something happens. Spock is convinced that it was all staged by Omni. There is a burning building, and a woman is inside with her baby. And it is part of her culture to die in that fire. But Kirk, seeing it, cannot abide by the Prime Directive. He, of course, cannot watch that happen. So he dashes into the burning building to save her. And tosses out the baby to Spock, who's waiting, who's almost ready to go in himself, before the whole roof comes down on him, and he dies. The book starts with Spock beaming back to the Enterprise with the body of Captain Kirk in a body bag. He takes the body to Bones McCoy to examine it. Is this a fake? Can you absolutely say this is true? And that's how the novel begins, believe it or not. No captain's log, no huge prologue, no gigantic, boring chapter set from the villain's point of view. No, nothing like that. Nothing like that at all. Instead, it starts this way. Dr. McCoy had one thought in his mind. Spock must be spared this. He turned hastily to the transporter position next to him and took Spock by the arm. The Vulcan did not even protest as McCoy led him off the platform. McCoy wanted to steer him through the corridors of the Enterprise, hustle him to the haven of sickbay, anything but let the Vulcan stay and see the security men bringing up the stretcher with the body bag. But Spock stopped himself at the transporter console. He planted himself like a rock with that immovable Vulcan strength, and now his peculiar immobility amounted almost to catatonia. "Energize," he said in a shockingly normal voice. Scotty stood at the controls himself. He looked blasted, empty, suddenly old. His shoulders struggled to hold themselves at attention, as if they were an honor guard. His hands worked the controls with special care, as if that could matter now. Uhura stood inside the door, neither explaining her presence nor apologizing for the tears which ran down the beautiful dark face. The transporter shimmered. 2 Enterprise security men materialized, took a firmer grip on the anti-grav lifts, and stepped carefully off the platform with the stretcher that bore the body of Captain James T. Kirk. McCoy examines the body and determines beyond a shadow of a doubt that there is no mistake. This is Jim Kirk. And Spock wants blood. 1,000 years of Vulcan emotional control doesn't matter at all. He wants blood. He wants to kill Omni, the man who he is sure killed his best friend. But it turns out, and here this is not a spoiler, this is at the beginning of the book, it turns out that Omni has developed, in addition to those impenetrable shields, one other piece of technology, the Phoenix process. A process that takes the extreme mental and physiological excitement of the moment of death and imprints it onto transporter patterns of a living person to create an exact duplicate, not false, not fake, not partial, an exact duplicate of that person. In this case, Jim Kirk. Spock goes back down to the planet, and Omni confronts him with Jim Kirk, the naked body of Jim Kirk, alive and well. And now everything has changed. Everything is different. Because, as Omni points out, what government, what control system of any kind is not vulnerable to that? What statesman, what ruthless tyrant wouldn't surrender everything to have back the one person who means everything to them? Not an android or a fake duplicate, but the actual person. That he's defeated death, and he's the only one who knows how this process works. So he's in a position to destabilize the galaxy like no other person has ever been. Spock doesn't really care about all of that. He wants the double, and he wants Omni. And it turns out, in the course of the novel, that perhaps the original Kirk is still alive. So we're dealing with a dead body, perfect duplicate, perfect enough to fool Dr. McCoy. Not fool him. It is the person. And also a double, and also the original. There are two things that you want to happen in the... Actually, there are several things that want to happen at the end of this book. And Sandra Marshak and Marilyn Calbreth were old-time Star Trek fans. They were original Star Trek fans. They believed in it. They believed in its essence. They read all of that dot matrix fiction. God help them. So did I. And knew what the best of it was like. They also knew some of the habits of the worst of it, some of which are immortalized in this book. A lot of that early Star Trek fan fiction that was passed around, mailed out in crappy Xerox copies. A lot of that had a lot of torture in it, and a lot of homoerotic stuff between Kirk and Spock. There's no homoerotic stuff between Kirk and Spock here, except the subtext of a mind link. But there's a lot of sadomasochism, a lot of it. Omni doesn't just want to defeat Jim Kirk; he wants to beat Jim Kirk physically until Jim Kirk cries for mercy. Wants to break him as a man, which is odd, and you just have to put up with that. But these two also knew what the heart and soul of what fans want out of a Star Trek novel, which a lot of other Star Trek writers who came later do not know. There are several things that you want to happen in this book. Of course, you want Omni to be defeated. He's the bad guy. Even though he turns out to be a lot more complex and nuanced than a simple bad guy, you still want him to be defeated. You also want the Romulan commander to show her true colors. You don't want her to end up being a bad guy. She can be a little bit ambivalent. At the time, that's what Romulans were seen as. The Klingons were just unambiguous bad guys. It wasn't until the Next Generation that they became nuanced themselves. The Romulans, though, were cool. They were the cool villains. They could do noble things. The two times that we see a Romulan, they do noble things. So, you want that. And there's also one other thing that you want as you're reading this book. You want Spock and Omni to fight. Physically. Omni is not human. He is big. He's very tall. He's very broad, very muscular, and is Vulcanoid. He's not a Vulcan, but his blood is blue-green. It's not green like a Vulcan, but it's not red like a human. He is much stronger than a normal human being. He is easily able to crush Jim Kirk in physical combat. But Spock, an enraged Spock, you have to wait a while. You have to wait until the climax to get it, but it's worth it. It's very much worth it. And there's also a great ending where it's not just Kirk and Spock. You also, in a Star Trek novel, it's not just Kirk and Spock and also the female Romulan commander. You also want McCoy to be in there, a little, somehow. And he is. He doesn't get much play in here, but he gets some. And it's pitch perfect. The final scene on the Enterprise is pitch perfect. This, of course, gave rise to a sequel, The Fate of the Phoenix, and I've long since given up hope for the third book. I wish this were a trilogy. There are things left hanging at the end of The Fate of the Phoenix that I wish had been wrapped up, but It's never going to happen. But this is so good. It's so cheesy, but it's so good. And I thought that I would spend the video talking about it so that I don't have to talk about this thing anymore. So we're just going to pass on away from exploring Picard's galaxy and his safe spaces, and we'll come back to Star Trek next time. Thank you, BookTrek.